Today I'm back to basics. I am with Andy Hooper, restaurant industry leader who's really built his career on this powerful philosophy that exceptional hospitality has to begin with your team. So Andy's journey is really fascinating. We met when he was at And Pizza, but before that he was at Cafe Rio, and he actually most recently founded Hart House as CEO. Through it all, he's really stood for something important that I've really identified with, which is when you really invest in your employees, you create this beautiful ripple effect. Your team thrives, the business succeeds, and ultimately your guests walk away with a better, more memorable experience. So these days, Andy's sharing his wisdom as an advisor, helping restaurant owners find that sweet spot where business decisions and just, you know, general human connection meet. So, Andy, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're working on these days.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you for that. It's fun now to even just hear that and like kind of go back through. Also shows how far Opus has come too, candidly.
Yeah,
Because when we were meeting, it was like back at close to patient zero from that perspective.
in a very dark, dank office somewhere in Chinatown.
In a very different time in the world too, where I think ironically I probably was actually sitting in roughly the same spot. It was just not sunny and there weren't plants here. Yeah, so I've been in this game now for 25 years, and as you mentioned, I think it's not that people development like should be at the center of it because it feels right or because it's like what should happen in the restaurants because there's human capital involved. It's also just good business. And that's not necessarily a news flash to folks either. I think what people are facing right now more than anything is the idea that like even if they know that intuitively, how do they put that first when there's all of this other pressure? I am working on right now with a partner launching a venture studio that incubates talent-backed food and beverage brands. And we've been working on that for the better part of about 6 months, and a lot of it based upon the learning from Hart House, which was, the kind of the first opportunity I had to start something from scratch, build it with people development and a proactive, preemptive investment in the people of the business being sort of at day one. I think a lot of existing operators may struggle to make big revolutionary change in their business, not because they don't want to, because it's like daunting to mess with something structural that has long returns. Kind of in the same way that people don't love ripping out capital projects from their restaurant, replacing a giant oven unless they need to, because they're like, oh man, I know this is the right thing to do, but the return profile's long.
I want to come back to the management team aspect of it in a minute. Overall, it just sounds like you're putting all of your amazing brain space to use. And I'm sure some blood, sweat, and tears. A lot is changing very quickly in the industry these days. And you have so much exposure to different restaurant operations. So I'm curious to hear what patterns or trends are jumping out at you. More specifically, what's the restaurant industry challenge that's most concerning to you right now?
One of the things that I'm hearing kind of across the board from folks is that there's a real fear in investing in restaurants like as we know them with people and food and no like arbitrage around tech or robotics or something else. And
Yeah.
it kind of feels to me like the industry is very much going down like this path of you either have to be automated, infinite kitchen style operators, or you have to be really rich in real life, full service, experiential. And it's interesting to me. I think that's like the most concerning trend is that everything sort of feels like it has to be either this or that. And it can't be both of these things at the same time ever. That people in the restaurant space are kind of saying like, it scares me if a concept is just trying to like deliver on operating excellence and let that be enough. It's like, there has to be an angle. And I always get scared about that because I'm like, that's such a chain restaurant mentality. I mean, there's so many individual, like independent operators out there in the universe who have no tech stack or no performance review system or no anything. And they do an excellent job. And we go to those places right now as human beings all the time. And true, wonderful hospitality still wins the day, no matter
Right.
what you're peddling or how complicated or simple your operation is. So I think that's probably the thing that's most concerning is that there's some pressure to figure out like the formula and then that's it.
Right. It's like the tech or not approach. And
Yeah.
or the forward thinking or not. And sometimes it's, just the tried and true, be who you are.
We were out at dinner with some friends in DC at a very fun restaurant last Sunday night. I was such a reminder of how simple hospitality and structuring your business in a way where you can over deliver on expectations is so important. We had a vegetarian amongst the four of us that were out. We ordered a meal that involved pork. We didn't say anything. They knew there was a vegetarian because it was small plates, Levantine cuisine, and so we were ordering a bunch of things to share. And the kitchen brought out a completely duplicate version of the dumplings that we had ordered for her. And it wasn't that we asked, it wasn't that they were like, oh, maybe we can make three dumplings as part of the same thing off to the side for her. They just brought an entirely new dish out.
Yeah.
I went from thinking, man, these are kind of expensive small plates as I was going through. I mean, I love the restaurant, have been before, and it's wonderful. But I went from thinking these are kind of expensive to like, man, what an incredible value. And it was all because they had structured the service delivery of the restaurant to allow for that, to like just let somebody surprise and delight a customer because it fit within the economics of what they were doing.
So is the concern that the root of hospitality is leaving the industry, or that people are overthinking it
I
more
think
than
it's more the latter.
yeah.
People are trying to be formulaic. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like there's a hack, right? And I think if you've been, as you have, obviously worked in restaurants yourself for a good chunk of your career, like there's no substitute for the long brand building journey that is just building an excellent restaurant. Like stuff doesn't happen overnight. You can't. I always laugh when people are like, "Look at Chick-fil-A, isn't it amazing?" It's like Chick-fil-A is like 60 years old, guys. Like it didn't happen overnight. Like you can't just go out tomorrow and in 7 years with private equity and like an experienced management team build Chick-fil-A. Like you need 6 decades to do that. And so I think it's just a good reminder of like fundamentals matter. Like operating excellence matters. And sometimes there is no hack. You just go out and do the thing really well, which is why it's so important to have people development at the center of what you do.
Thinking forward then, or I guess thinking more on the optimistic side of things, of not necessarily what the industry is losing, but what they have to gain. I'm curious what you're genuinely optimistic about in the industry right now.
No question, like genuinely optimistic about the fact that people are not socializing enough over the
Mm,
last 5 or 6 years,
this
and
is real.
they are realizing it and slowly starting to venture back out to the kinds of routines that they held before. I think they're encountering the missing piece of their life that is not being out there and doing things in real life with one another. So that makes me incredibly optimistic because food, restaurants, hospitality broadly has always been at the center of that, and it will be again. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity right now for people to just lean into that. Like there is story after story after story about loneliness, about isolation, about screen time, about the anxious generation. But all that stuff is all rooted in the idea that like we're not socializing as much, but we are doing more now than we were 24 months ago.
I was reading this morning about how still in New York, for better or worse, city officials are cracking down on the sheds, the dining sheds, which I thought were already gone, but apparently they're still here. But there's something that you just said that made me think about the fact I've always been like pro shed because it's more seats for restaurant. Like if you
Yep,
have more
yep.
covers, then you have more money, and like I think that's good, and everyone eats. But there is something interesting about bringing it back to where it used to be, and like even just the optics of the restaurant being this like pre-pandemic like visual is inviting people to actually just sit at a cafe table on the curb and not need a big you know medicinal plastic bubble around them or whatever it is.
I mean, I think again, like if the root of what the experience is warrants an Alpenglobe, then give them an Alpenglobe,
That's
right?
sure, that too.
And if it's not, then don't. But I think I truly believe. So one thing that I'm working on a project right now, which is really fascinating. That is in like adjacent to like a private members club experience as a component of what it is. And what's fascinating is the more you research what's happening, I mean, there is, especially in New York, like a proliferation of these private members clubs. And you can read an article everywhere about how yet another one is being stood up. And, it's got these components from Soho House and this component from Cipriani, and it has these design aesthetics from Zero Bond, but it's not any of those. It's different. And I think what the answer is that those proliferation of those things and the momentum around them and people's interest in them comes back to that hospitality desire that I mentioned earlier. It's not so much that there's this like formulaic thing where it's like you build a library and it has an arch and your club menu must have a burger and the burger must be $18. It's not that formulaic, but what it is saying is yes, not trying to overthink it and coming back to the whole like welcome to my home. I read this incredible article about this man in Harlem who has been doing these dinner parties at his house for years now,
Hmm.
and like people want to get into his home for this party. It's like one of those things where like you don't know how to get in. You know, if you get in, it's because he wanted you there. It's a cross section of everyday men and women of the city and celebrities and socialites and business leaders and everything else, and it's this kind
Uh,
of like curated thing. But
Sounds
what
very
the
New York.
yeah, very. But the magic sauce, like the secret sauce of that is the fact that it's gathering, is nourishment. And I think that word is something that we've been really fixated on that project, which is that the world needs nourishment, and food and hospitality often give that level of nourishment. And that word is by design, not by default. It's deeper and richer than satisfaction or than belonging. It's something that's like letting you leave better than when you came,
Hmm.
and not just on a full stomach or with a full heart, but like fuller, like in the broadest possible sense.
I would argue that there's some people listening, though, who are thinking this whole concept of hospitality, or like the tried and true Danny Meyer hospitality, whatever it might be, that hospitality is expensive. Thinking about the flip side of that is that when you think about companies that want to invest more, that actually have the desire but face financial
Yeah,
pressure, like
yeah,
what's the investment that they should never cut? And it can't be as simple as like just don't cut your people, like
yeah,
what
yeah,
is
sure. I actually should never ask or answer a question with a question, but here's my answer. When was the last time you heard of a restaurant with exceptional hospitality going out of business? Like,
Yeah.
I can't, right? Like there's no obvious link between overspending on hospitality and going out of business. But there is a trail of tears about underinvesting in your people and going out of business, or underinvesting in your food quality and going out of business. And so I just find it deeply ironic when people are like, I can't afford to, when the
Yeah.
counterfactual of like, you can't afford not to is actually more important. And it's scary because restaurants are cash flow like exercises. And if you're undercapitalized, then the thought of overinvesting in growth is difficult. But it's often because we as leaders don't break those down into digestible tactics that somebody can use. Like selling one additional dessert an hour often pays for the overinvestment in hospitality, or like surprising and delighting a guest with something unexpected that brings them back 6 days sooner than they otherwise would have come back also pays for that investment. And so
Mm.
we talked a lot at Hart House about the fact that we were very bold about making a proactive investment in our people that cost more money, but you can't stop there. What you must do then is raise the standard of execution to a level that says, in exchange for this proactive investment in you, like, I knew you before you were you in this, and I chose to invest you in this way. You must operate here, because when you do, this is what the flywheel looks like in the other direction. And again, like using a simple QSR example that doesn't think about it as being like over invested, Chick-fil-A to me is like the pinnacle of that. It's like they do very simple things over and over again at a very high level, sort of back to basics over and over. And you leave with this sense of exceptional hospitality and value for the money, given what it means and where it sits for people.
Right.
Like to me, that is an example of them not losing the script as a brand.
And I love where you're headed with this, because I think a lot of people, specifically with Chick-fil-A, will talk about my pleasure and like that, how that sort of scripting is what ties it all together. I think what really brings hospitality to life is the gum wrapper rule. Like well, no one uses gum wrappers anymore, but like if you're walking by a napkin, are you going to pick it up? And it's
Hmm.
the things that don't exist in a pamphlet, that don't exist in a training. It goes beyond the script. And I agree with that, like raising the bar has to come at all levels. But this sense of like, I would imagine that the sense of nourishment, as you're saying, on the guest side also goes to nourishment on the employee side as well.
Yeah, I think again, we as operators, I think it's our responsibility to look for structural ways to build that kind of nourishment. Meaning, back to the example of my dinner last Sunday, that restaurant clearly has priced their menu, set their service model, trained their staff that they not only can they surprise and delight, but like it's an expectation. Like you should be looking for this throughout the meal. And if you don't do that thing, I'm going to ask questions because, like, of course, there was an opportunity to knock their socks off over the course of 2.5 hours. Why didn't you take it? And that comes back to that's just such a different mindset than like giving your manager a swipe card and saying anything over X dollars has to be approved by me.
Yeah.
It's like it's the inverse of that. Hey, we've taken into account and priced the menu and hired the team and staffed the restaurant and given you the training. It's our expectation of you that you find a way to do this over the course of your shift. And if you're having a trouble not being able to find a way to do this, raise your hand and say, like, I'm not sure where to look for this. But your answer can't be like, oh, I'm worried about food cost. It's like, no, no, no. If our food cost comes in at 23 because you didn't give something for free this shift, then we're not doing what we need to do to develop retained frequent guest stuff. And so that's where I really feel like we have to kind of shift our approach as operators is when you do raise the bar, it's not just like I expect more of you, but it's like here are all the things I've done structurally to enable that so that you don't have to worry about missing your COGS target. I mean, every manager in the world isn't going to do that if they know that they have to do that within the bounds of their current KPI. And that's candidly why training sucks. I mean, I saw you post something the other day, which I totally agree with, which is like the operators expect people to be like proficient on day one with no ramp. And the corporate finance department expects somebody to be in position, like contributing at 100% of productivity the moment they're on the schedule. And it's like, well, structurally, you are literally setting your team up for failure. If they don't, it's because they're ingenious and or doing something like illegal to make it happen. Like that's the answer. And a lot of restaurant operators will look the other way and sort of pretend like that's not reality.
I was thinking the same thing where there's of course behind all of this naturally occurring hospitality, there's some sort of training engine beneath it. And we recently published a survey that captured trends in training operations in restaurants. So I wanted to get your reflections on a couple of the findings. The first one being exactly what you're talking about, which is learning and development professionals right now are really caught between shrinking budgets and pressure to maintain the same quality and speed, frankly, increasing speed, ramp times, what have you. So, as someone who has made resource allocation decisions at the executive level, I'm curious how you prioritize speed over quality or vice versa in training programs. Like, how do you think about the reality of restaurants and where they need to be allocating training spend?
Part of it is I tell people this when it comes to technology a lot, which is like just work on your business process first. Get the business process in the right place, then take your business process that you love to a tech provider and say, help me do this thing more efficiently.
Mm.
So much better than responding to a salesperson saying, I have all these cool features that'll do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, awesome. And then you do it, and it doesn't really actually help your business process at all. Or perhaps worse yet, the business process becomes a tail wag the dog scenario of that tech relationship, and you end up doing things that are unnatural. You have to take the same approach when it comes to getting people up to speed and keeping them up to speed with training in a restaurant and not be subject to some antiquated paradigm that says, this is the day of the week that we train, or this is the time of the week that we train. You have to ask yourself, like, should this happen in this way or not? Can it happen economically or not? Or is there a different way to do it? And I like to use the example of like full service restaurants or places where there's a lot of prep and scratch cooking. And the idea that a lot of that happens like before the restaurant is open. Like when I was at Cafe Rio, we had people prepping and cooking in the restaurant starting at like 7 a.m. And it was only after like 5 or 6 years of doing that that we started to ask our questions like, why? Like, does that have to happen then? Or can it happen during a different time of the day or even in a different place that's more economical, that frees up some hours for us to do proper training so that these people aren't having to like double and triple up when the restaurant's not generating any revenue? And I guess put simply, what you need to do is just like smash the paradigm of what it is today and build it with a zero-based budgeting mindset. Like start from the ground up and say, like, how many hours does it really take for somebody to learn how to do this job? And then you have to say, okay, well, then we're going to protect that at all costs. Like the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to make sure that somebody has this number of hours to learn how to do this job. Because if we don't, we're just going to be doing it again and again and again and again. And it's going to be 70 hours to do it instead of 10. And I think when you start doing that and breaking it down from a first principles perspective, you uncover that many of the things that exist in restaurant training programs today are just like iterated from a paradigm where we didn't have any of the same things that we have today. And so starting with a blank piece of paper may be scary, but it may lead you to a lot of really interesting insights. It did for us and the team at Hart House, where we just said, like, for example, like how many restaurant operators out there have a 6-week GMIT training program or an 8-week GMIT training program? It's like, we just said, like, how long does it take to learn the things that we need to teach somebody? And the answer was like 10 days. So we're like, okay, GMIT program is a 10-day training program. So he's like, you can't train somebody in 10 days. Well, if you hire them properly and you actually give them those 10 days training, and those 10 days aren't 8 hours of quasi productive labor covering for a cashier who didn't show up, then yes, they can learn that stuff in 10 days.
It's great advice. Just the concept of making training situational and being more comfortable with like a blank slate than just almost like iterating from old bad practices. One thing the data also very clearly shows, which probably won't come as a surprise, is that tracking operational metrics against training success obviously leads to budget protection, but only 40% of L&D teams in restaurants are actually doing that. Most of them are still tracking just completion as a metric for success. You know, you've worked in corporate environments like Burger King, you've worked in growth concepts like And Pizza. I guess what's your advice for those L&D leaders who maybe don't have access to the P&L or aren't given access to the P&L?
I mean, I don't want to be trite or flippant about this, but like my advice is get access to the P&L. Why even have the department if they don't understand how their work ties into the actual business and what
Yeah.
matters, right? Like, if you're going to go so far as to invest in a platform to help you deliver training more effectively, a human being to lead the charge and be a strategic partner to the operating team, like give them access. As an HR manager earlier in my career, I spent all of my time shoulder to shoulder with people in Burger Kings, sometimes closing a Burger King at 2 in the morning with an assistant manager just to be able to get access to things that, weren't, I wasn't on the listserv as a, regional HR manager for the, Southeast Division's company P&L. But like you can get that stuff. And the more you understand, not only that, but like how people are measured and what pressure they're under, you're going to be able to deliver a lot more effectively on tying the right KPIs to the investment that you're making in L&D.
Mm.
If you don't have that access, you got to get it. If you're trying to fly blind, it's just not going to work.
I agree. And I think even if someone isn't necessarily granted immediate access, I think there's portions that you can be asking for that are appropriate.
Sure.
Like I think I've heard this before from L&D leaders that there's, it's like I have asked, but they said no. It's like, well, get creative. I want to finish up the conversation with diving deeply into people development. You've been doing this for so many years, and I think a lot of people, including myself, want to know when you are spotting potential leaders, what are the specific signals that you're looking for?
Uh, so I think the number one character trait that I'm looking for after 25 years that seems to indicate somebody's upward mobility is their capacity for curiosity. The
Yeah.
more certain they are of things, the worse it gets and the faster it gets worse. The more curious they are, the more opportunity there is. And I think it's just such a natural, I mean, it's such an interesting toggle switch on the mood elevator where, like, if somebody is curious, they will encounter something like somebody stealing from them, let's say. And their answer will be that that person faces consequences and it likely results in termination. But their approach will be, I wonder why that made sense to that person to do that, instead of that person is terrible. And the difference in growth of I wonder why that made sense is that if they seek for understanding of why theft made sense, they can identify what led us there. Maybe it's financial precarity and pressure that person's facing outside of work. And maybe if that becomes a pattern you see, you start thinking about ways you can provide benefits to your employees that reduce their financial precarity and their certainty. And you come up with things like emergency savings plans or other things, and you speak directly to people's motivation. And so I always look for curiosity because that to me is the number one indicator that you're going to be able to innovate to keep pace with the way that the world changes.
Yeah, it's like an indicator of adaptability. So then, $1 million question, what's your go-to interview question in order to spot that?
I'm not sure that it's an actual question. I think it is watching how they answer and the degree to which across a battery of questions in an hour or 2 hours of being together, both in an interview setting like this or shoulder to shoulder in the business, how certain are they of something that is new to them? Or how curious are they? I mean, if they ask a bunch of questions, I'm always interested in that as a mark of curiosity. I can tell when I get to the end of an interview and I say, what questions do you have for me? And it's like very clearly that there are five prepared questions that are the best questions to ask your interviewer. They're AI generated. And it's like, no, I want to know, like, what are you actually interested in? Like, what are you curious about? Like, what don't you know that you wish you knew about this?
Well, this kind of goes back to you and your aspirational days then. What's the leadership advice that you got that really shaped how you think about developing talent?
There are two pieces I think that have stuck with me. The first happened when I was a student delegate on the board of trustees at the University of Miami a long time ago now. And one of the trustees told me when I mentioned that I was interested in a career in hospitality that I should study human resources. And at the time, I was like, you mean like Toby Flenderson from The Office? Like that? Like, I don't want to be that. And his response was, no, no, no. Like, you need to study it because in hospitality, you will have a predominantly lower wage, hourly, deskless workforce that you will work with. And you need to know everything, not just about the legality of things or like what things are okay to ask and not, but about what a lived experience is like for a housekeeper in a hotel or a prep cook in a kitchen. And that was exceptional advice because I grew up through human resources with direct access to frontline folks in a way that was in many cases like more trusted for me learning the business than it would have been had I been an operator. Because in many respects, like I wasn't their boss, I was their confidant. And so it just gave me a chance to really try to understand like what makes people tick. And that kind of pegs to the second piece of advice that I got that I think sticks with me to this day. I was so fortunate to have uh, a run-in with a mentor, John McKay, who taught culture shaping for Sen Delaney Leadership Consulting, which had a relationship with Burger King, and all of these principles of the human operating system, of which one of them being sort of this focus on curiosity, were foundational for me. Like the fact that I see people as having an operating system like iOS or Android, and I want to understand like what operating system they have, like what is driving them, and that shapes how I interact with them and how I lead them was a huge piece of my early development and something that frankly like makes me maybe better at life, at being a dad, at being a husband. But that is something that's absolutely stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a great way to see the world too, and it ties back to the point of curiosity. All right, well, with the back to basics lightning round, everyone gets 4 questions. You have to do the thing that no leader likes to do, which is answer it in one word.
Okay. All right. I like this. This is exciting.
So, first question: what was your first job?
Lawn mowing.
What was the last book you read or podcast that you listened to?
The Art of Gathering.
Oh, yeah. I just got that on my list from a friend. But what's a food trend you are completely over?
acai bowls.
And what is a skill that you are working on?
Throwing a softball, fast pitch softball style.
Is that a
I have
metaphor or?
no, I have twin daughters that are playing softball and they're in kid pitch now, like AAA ball for
Yeah,
Little League. And so I am trying to learn how to throw a softball like a professional underhand fast pitch softball pitcher because I know nothing about it.
great skill. Well, Andy Hooper, it was so nice to see you, and thank you so much for joining me. A
Thank
pleasure
you.
as
Yeah.
always. Yeah, and we
Awesome.
will see
Thanks,
you next
Rachel.
time.
Appreciate it.